Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwaraha, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So, this is our fourth, next to last class on the Bhagavad-Gita. Let me just recap a little bit about many of people who study this subject of non-duality, which seems so abstract, so removed from our daily life of duality, that the question arises, is there some practical, what's the practical thing here? All right, I've heard all of this, yes, I'm the presence and I'm pure consciousness, I've read about it, I've heard of it, but then is that it? Because it doesn't seem like much has changed, even if I think I've recognized that fact. So the question naturally comes, so what's the practical? And this is the beauty of the Bhagavad-Gita, because although it teaches the highest truth of non-duality, it's in the text very clearly, the predominant teaching is the practical. Practical in Sanskrit means sadhana. What are the means by which I can come not merely to read about this or to reflect on it, but how could it be that I could know this truth in a way that when I knew it, all suffering would immediately cease? That when I know this truth, I'll be that. That's the promise. Brahmavid paramapnoti, the knower of that absolute reality, the true self in everyone. He attains the highest, paramapnoti. So there must be something that I don't know, this supreme self, and I'm ignorant of it. And because of that ignorance, because I don't know myself to be that ever-present consciousness as my nature that I can never lose, merely because I don't know that, I've taken myself to be something other than that. The whole purpose of this text is to remove that misconception by revealing the nature of the self. But in order to realize the true nature of the self, according to the Gita, according to Vedanta, the instrument by which this truth is to be known is a special instrument. The mind has to become extremely oriented inwards, introvert, introspective, discriminative. The mind has to become somewhat equanimous to allow it. If it has all sorts of distractions, this type of discrimination is not possible. So the mind has to have what's called samatva, equanimity of mind, openness of mind. The mind has to be not dogmatic, not filled with its own beliefs, but an open, quiet, discriminative, introspective mind. That mind is called a pure mind. All of the sadhanas in the Bhagavad-Gita, the practical, is that. It's all in duality, that you have a mind, the mind is extrovert. That's all taken for granted here. For the person who is in ignorance, I am this, I have a mind, my mind is extrovert. He hasn't realized that he has no mind. So for that person, what's the practical? For the ignorant person like us, what's the practical? So the practical is what's the main teaching of the Bhagavad-Gita for the majority of people, is this thing that's called karma yoga. Now, there's only one yoga. Yoga is realizing I am that. That's yoga. That's the real meaning of yoga. Because that knowledge joins me with that. Just like the knowledge that the 10th man got when he said, you are the 10th. When he realized he became the 10th. He wasn't the 10th because of his ignorance. But when he realized, I am that, I am the 10th, then the search was over. In this inquiry, in order to realize I am that, the mind must be able to discriminate in a very peculiar way, because to discriminate the ego from consciousness is not a simple thing. It's the ego that seems to be conscious. I see, I know, I'm aware. So that I seems that whatever that I notion is conscious. In order to discriminate that I notion is just another thought, I know, I see, I'm fat, I'm thin, I'm happy, I'm sad. That I is not a quality of the self. Why? It's changing. It appears and disappears. The same I is not in waking and dream, and in deep sleep, that I disappears. So that can't be the nature of the self, nor does it exist in the state of liberation. There's no more duality. So the ego is not the true nature of to do this type of discrimination is already considered quite an achievement. And that the karma yoga, and I'll explain now the practical, what does it mean? Is it some type of religious yoga? We think even of asanas or pranayama, or yoga is some exotic trances. But here, yoga, karma yoga, in its broadest sense, really means everything that assists you in making the mind fit enough to realize this teaching, I am that. So when the Gita talks about karma yoga, it encompasses things like ethics. Being a good person is karma yoga. Being truthful is karma yoga. Making an effort to be compassionate is karma yoga. Helping others is karma yoga. Why? Because it purifies you. The result of those attitudes, self-discipline, is karma yoga. There's no discipline in your senses or mind, then the mind runs riot. So of course, that's karma yoga. Doing actions without an extreme concentration on the result of the action, knowing that those actions are not going to, those results are not going to bring me the solution to my problem. No matter how many things I get, death is waiting. So I had said that this Gita is not a religious text. Because, why is it not a religious text? Because it doesn't demand that you believe any dogma. It doesn't demand that you take anything on faith. This whole tradition is that we must question everything. In Sanskrit, it's called jignasa. In English, we call it philosopher. But in the true sense, a love for truth and wisdom, not for its own sake, but because there's the idea that there's some benefit in knowing the truth, and there's a burning desire to know it, a seeker of truth, wanting to question everything, every belief with an open mind. That's the philosophical status of someone engaging in this type of study. Since the subject matter of this teaching is your own self, which can't be thought of, which can't be objectified, which can't be described by any word or thought of by any concept, since that's the subject matter of the Gita, obviously it's going to require a mind that is not like a mind that wants to know about the outside world by using its senses and then reasoning and coming to conclusions. That will be of no avail in this inquiry into the self. So the one who's inquiring, well, who is the self? Is there a self? What is the self? Maybe there's no self. What's the nature? That person, he's just an inquirer, desiring to know, and whatever the evidence warrants, that's what they're going to believe. The belief must be based on the evidence, not on our desire, what we would like to be the case. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a heaven or an all-loving God? Wouldn't it? Or wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a Brahman and that was Satchitananda? And wouldn't it be wonderful? That's not what is required here. We have to see if it's a fact. We have to inquire into it. That person who has that desire is a philosopher. This text, the Gita, is a philosophy text in that sense. It asks us to discriminate between the witness and the witnessed. That's not religion. In your own experience, Idam shariram kaunteya kshetramiti abhidiyate. This body, mind, senses, and ego are all object, Arjuna. Etat yoveti tam prahu kshetranya tatvidaha. And the one who knows this body, mind, senses, and ego, the one who knows that, is called the Kshetrajna, the knower of the field, including time, space, causality, every object. The knower of all of that is called the knower of the field. Kshetrajna chapi mam vidi sarva kshetreshu. This is the 13th chapter, the beginning. Know that witness in you, Arjuna, that knower of the field, you should know that to be me. That is the supreme, that witness in you that's witnessing your thoughts, that's witnessing the ego, that's witnessing the states, that's never changing. You should know, Arjuna, that that's me, the supreme being, the Satchitananda. You should know that witness in you to be me. That's the God of the so-called God, the supreme being of the Gita, the witness in everybody. In order to realize this, Arjuna, because the people who have realized this and have their mind on this and are joined to this and revel in this, those people, they don't need any karma yoga. But for the people who are identified with their body, mind, and senses, even if they believe I'm not the body, mind, and senses, but somehow I seem related to them, that connection is still there. When the mind is unhappy, I've become unhappy. There seems to be a relationship between myself and the mind. For those people, they have to get fit enough to realize not only aren't they the mind, but there is no mind. So you can imagine that final stage when there's only the self without a second. But until then, the practical is all of the things about how we live our life. The spiritual life requires things like humility. Why? Because our attachment to the ego is the main problem. And when that ego is bloated, it just makes that attachment even greater. The whole idea is through humility to make that ego less and less, with the attachment to it less and less. That's called amanitvam, adamvitvam, lack of boasting, arjavam, lack of hypocrisy, indriyarteshu varagyam, a certain dispassion for the objects of the senses. That the senses naturally want to enjoy the objects. But the person who's somewhat discriminative and wants to know this truth, they won't allow their minds to be pulled out to those objects because they've seen the truth of those type of games, that they have a beginning, they have an end. The whole idea of anything beginning and ending, to see that clearly and to know that what I want is something unending, something that doesn't perish. My life is going to perish, and everything I have with it is going to perish. That's the tragedy of life. It's short. It's a moment in eternity. So, if there is a way to understand something in this life, that's a fact, that when it's looked at from that point of view, all of my previous ideas are seen to be correct only from a different point of view, It's kind of like in the dream. The people in the dream, for them, all the things are absolutely real. The dream scientists with the dream laws and the dream cause it's all real in the dream. In the same way, Vedanta doesn't say this is not real in this state. It's absolutely, we see it, we hear it. It's only from another perspective that we're able to say this state is just like a dream, and that the only unchanging reality is the consciousness in which all of the states are appearing and disappearing. To get to that, to discriminate the states from the witness, not just the body, mind, and senses from the witness, but the whole waking state is an object to the witness. To get to that, the mind, the adhikari, the qualified student, is not just anybody. The mind has to be made fit. This is the practical Vedanta. So karma yoga merely means doing, not stopping your actions. Because if I merely stop doing things, my ignorance won't go. I'll just be sitting there and saying, I'm not going to do anything. No benefit. In fact, that in self, I'm not going to do anything, it's a type of action. Because the agent is still there and I am not doing anything. And after a while, of course, within a minute, he'll be doing something. He'll scratch his nose. So he can't stop doing, from that point of view, nobody can stop doing everything. As long as we're identified with this body, mind, and senses, we're forced to act. There are verses in the Gita that describe this very situation. That everybody, because of our ignorance, we feel that when the body acts, I act. When the body sits, I sit. When the mind thinks, I'm thinking. We all are identified with the objects. So, the third chapter, Krishna says, in this world there are these two paths. For the person who hasn't discriminated the self from the not self, jnana yoga, who still has the idea that I am this, or I'm related to this, or this is mine, or I am this, for that person, he can't get free from karma in his ignorance, and no matter what he does, he won't become, or she won't become free from karma. And therefore, Krishna says in the third chapter here, very clearly, na karmana mamarambat naishkarmyam purusham ashnute. A person doesn't attain freedom from all actions merely by stopping acting. Merely by not undertaking actions, a person does not attain actionlessness. There's an implication in this verse. It's that we do have to attain actionlessness, freedom from action. Because if I am an agent really doing actions, then there'll be a result that I'm going to have to reap until I die. Something will occur. If I do something, some result will come, and it'll either be what I liked or what I don't like, or something I'm indifferent to, but some result. So how do you get free from that? Well, you would think the way to get free from karma is just stop doing actions. But the Gita, it's a paradox. You won't become free from action by not doing action, nor will you attain renunciation, nor will you attain perfection Perfection here means freedom from all actions. Naishkarma Siddhi. Nor will you attain perfection merely by renunciation, which means that if you go to a cave and renounce all worldly life, you won't attain perfection. So that according to Krishna here, this verse is saying, if you want to attain actionlessness, you must continue to perform your actions. And then the next verse says, Nahi kaschit chanamapi jatu tishtati akarma krit. Nobody, even for a moment, remains without action. Karyate avasya karma sarvaha prakriti gunahi jaha. That everyone is forced to act because this body, mind, and senses, which is whatever the qualities of this, is made up of nature, whatever qualities it has, such as going and coming, dark or fair, old or young, whatever qualities that gets superimposed on you. The body's sitting, I'm sitting. The body's walking, I'm walking. The arm is moving, I'm moving. The senses are operating, I'm seeing, I'm hearing. These are all actions that we can't stop even for a moment. We're forced to do them in our ignorance, even though our self never does anything, is the eternal witness, changeless, unchanging, ever present. Because I've taken myself and identified it with the object, that which is appearing to the self, I'm forced to act by the qualities of nature, prakriti gunaihi, the gunas of prakriti. Whatever the qualities of these nature, the 5 elements as they did it, or the 108 elements, whatever this thing is made up of, atoms, quarks, that whatever the whole universe is made up of, it has nothing to do with consciousness. The universe itself is an object in consciousness. It doesn't always appear to you. So I hope that, so let me continue a little bit more. So the person who wants to do this type of karma yoga, he realizes that I want to realize the self, and the self is the witness that's behind it all. It's called the inner self, the most in. And therefore, I want, in order to discover that self, I want the mind to be able to have the capacity to see what is the most in. Is the body the most in? Or are the senses more in than the body? Is the mind more in than the senses? Is the ego the most in, the real subject? Or is there something, pratak-atma, the inner self, the self that's behind it all? I'm using spatial words here. The self is not behind anything. The self is said to be all pervasive. It's in and through everything. It's the inner truth, the inner essence. Etat atmiyam idam sarvam, that which is the essence of all of this. That's the consciousness. Tat satyam, that is the reality. Sa atma, that is the self. Tattvamasi, you are that. The person who can realize that, of course, has no need for karma yoga, no need for any sadhana, no need for any spiritual practice. For the person to be able to realize that, he must become, in Sanskrit it's called dharmic. That means he has to lead a righteous life, a simple life, a life not obsessed with acquiring and showing off and parading. The mind has lost interest in that. It's a spiritualized mind. Karma yoga spiritualizes the mind. It purifies the mind. The karma yogi, the one who's living his life, our daily life, if it's done ethically, honestly, speaking truth, with an effort to be the qualities of humility and lack of hypocrisy, the qualities of self-discipline, that of course take an effort. These are all to be acquired by effort. But these are the qualities of a karma yogi. What is the purpose of all of this karma yoga? The only purpose of all of this sadhana is what's called chitta shuddhi, antakarana shuddhi, which means it just purifies your mind. It's only in a pure mind that this knowledge arises. That pure mind is called sattva, a sattvic mind. The mind that's turned outward, the natural mind, is called naturally extrovert. That's called bahirmukhi, always looking out, seeing what they want, what they don't want. And we go, but for the jignasu, the philosopher who wants to know the truth of the self, who am I? The only way to determine this is by introspection. That's called antarmukhi, facing inwards, the mind. So all of these practices, including things like meditations, because what does meditation do? Because we have to have another quality of the mind. It's not merely enough to be able to bring the mind in during this class. I hope for a moment we become somewhat more introvert. But what's required here is what's called ekagrita. That means the capacity to keep the mind on a subject for a long period of time. That the mind stays on that, not like 5 minutes and then you're off, just that the mind, and after a while that the mind can actually be orientated towards that, even while the actions are going on. Losing interest in the actions, losing attachment to those actions, because the mind has realized no action can bring me infinite result. All actions are limited, all efforts are limited. No effort could ever bring an end to my suffering. The very effort is the suffering. It's only realizing, solving the problem, knowing the truth of the matter. And the mind that's capable of knowing that truth in their own experience, so that it, upon realizing that, there's no chance that ignorance could ever come back. That's called the knowledge of the self. If a person were to realize or think, I've now known myself, but the duality continues, that's a different understanding of self-knowledge. So as a philosopher, as a seeker of truth, if there are these two ideas, when you know the self, you'll be the self. The other idea, when you know the self, you'll still see duality, and you'll know that it's false or something else. These are two different understandings of the fruit of knowledge. Is the fruit of knowledge that you become Brahman, or you become the self? Brahmavid, Brahma Bhavati. The knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. He's already Brahman, but because of ignorance, he seemed as though he wasn't. When the ignorance is gone, that's called attaining Brahman. He didn't attain anything except getting rid of his misconception. He was always that nature. So karma yoga, on a practical point of view, is everything that we can do to make our minds equanimous. One way to do that is to lose our attachment to the fruits of our activities, not stopping our activities. In fact, it is said, if you're not worried about the fruit, you'll be able to do that activity even better, because you can put all your energy into it, but the result will be whatever the result will be. You can do it the best you can do it, but the intention is not for the fruit. What is the intention? It's to purify my mind. All actions can be made into a yoga. The whole life has to be made into a yoga, in the sense that by living the life like this, I'll be qualified to know the truth. In other words, there's two steps. One is to get qualified by doing the practices that make my mind fit enough, competent enough to realize a teaching that is seemingly absolutely contradictory. It says, you are that. You, I am that, which is not possible, because I was born. I live in a world. I'm in nothing in the galaxy. How could I be that? So to understand the meaning of that, because there's obviously a contradiction, the two words can't be identical. That is the absolute, which is infinite, unending bliss, and I'm a sukhi dukhi samsari. I'm happy and sad. So in order to realize the truth of that statement, if it is true, the mind has to be made fit enough. That's why you can't separate Vedanta from, that the idea is you must become fit enough. And when you're fit enough, this teaching, you are that, will be as clear as the berry on the palm of your hand. There'll be no doubts, no contradictions, no obstacles to realize that truth. And the fruit of that will be moksha, because you'll then be that. You are infinite bliss, one reality without a second. So the mind has to be Atma Antakarana Shuddhi, that pure mind. Karma yoga is for that, that's the practical. Anything that takes your mind away from the objects and towards the subject is called yoga. Yoking your mind to that supreme. So karma yoga has a couple of components to it. One is the mind we continue to do the actions, but the mind has lost interest in the desire to get the fruit of that action. Now we can do that with any action. Washing, eating, working, taking care of our children, going to the office, because you're doing something. And you no longer have the anxiety about the result because you're doing it the best you can without anxiety, so you're doing it even better. But the mind is now orientated. The attitude is that I want to do this as a way to join my mind to that inner reality. When the karma is not joined to the fruit, but joined to that inner reality, that self that exists in everyone, when the mind is oriented to that, that karma becomes karma yoga. What happens when you lose interest in the fruit and the mind is oriented towards that? The mind becomes equanimous, pure, one-pointed. Through the practice of this, the mind becomes purer and purer. And it's not just that, oh, how long do I have to practice karma yoga? How pure do I have to? Because this discriminated knowledge, the jnana yoga, the discrimination is going on while you're doing this karma yoga practice. It doesn't prohibit you from doing the thing about I am not an actor, everything is just changing in my consciousness, but I never change. This type of reflection gets better as the karma yoga gets better. As the reflection gets better, and I can't explain right now, if you'll excuse me, maybe you can figure it out. As the discrimination gets better, the karma yoga gets better. They complement each other. Your discrimination gets better as the mind becomes more introvert, more quiet, more subtle, a yogi's mind, a pure mind. The discrimination that the subject and the object are as different as light and darkness, that they can never be mixed up, that they're of opposite natures, that type of discrimination becomes stronger as the mind, through the practice of karma yoga. So it's not some exotic religion. It's merely a mental orientation to know a truth, to make the mind capable of recognizing a fact. It's not, and it's a fact that can be recognized here and now. It's not a fact about heaven or some other realm. It's not a fact about things that you have to believe in. It's a fact that you can recognize like any other fact. It's a fact that when you recognize it, it can never be negated. Other facts, suppose I think something's a mirage, water in the desert. I think that's a fact. But if later I discover, oh, it was only sand, the light was it, there's no water, so that wasn't a fact, it gets negated. Every fact in this world gets negated in deep sleep. All the truths and all the untruths, all the beliefs and all the disbeliefs, they all get negated. There's only one thing that never can be negated, that can never be thought away, that can never be not present. To say I negate it requires that the consciousness is there. If there was no consciousness, there could be no affirmation and no negation. After you negate everything, there's one thing that remains that's different than the ego, the knower, the doer, the enjoyer. That's what that sentence, you are that, means. It means you are not the knower, that you are that. It's a negation. It's not an affirmation. When you negate everything, when everything has been negated, you are that. Nothing more needs to be done to know the self. You can understand this teaching. It's as clear as a bell. There's no more possibility of doubts. Why? Because there's no time. If time continued after this realization, then a doubt could come in a future time. But now time itself, the knower itself, the knower who could have a doubt in the future is not there anymore. I'm not a knower. I am Satchitananda. Aham Brahmasmi. I am that reality that doesn't see anything, know anything, want anything, desire anything. I am eternal peace, eternal freedom, eternal consciousness. The fact of, so the mind that can realize that fact, if it is a fact, because it shouldn't be accepted on the authority of any teacher, on the authority of any scripture, Upanishads, Bhagavad-Gita, etc. This is a truth that has to be verified by experience, and it's a truth which has to culminate in direct experience. So the place of karma yoga is a preliminary. It's called yoga only in the sense that it leads to the real yoga. But without karma yoga, you'll never be able to get free from the bondage of karma, because the way it works practically is that if you begin with the very first step of karma yoga, which is whatever your station in life, whatever you have to do, work, take care of your wife, children, earn money, eat, wash, take your bath, whatever you have to do could be made into a karma yoga, so that it has universal application, and it's not for some group or some cult. It's merely a way of performing actions, first without the desire or attachment or identification with the result. That immediately will make the mind more quiet less anxious, less apprehensive, will or will not the result occur. When that mind has become more quiet, the discrimination gets better. When the discrimination gets better, you can get to the stage where you realize, not only am I not identified with the fruit, I'm not identified with the thought of doing the action. That's just in the mind. It's an object to me, the subject. I am not identified with the action, nor the fruit. When the discrimination is strong enough, you see, the first stage, I'm the actor. I'm not going to be attached to the fruit. I'm going to orient my mind to that supreme being. In that case, I am the actor. I haven't given up that identification, just my attachment to the fruit. But even though I'm not attached to the fruit, because I did the action, the fruit will come. I won't be freed from the fruits of my actions merely by doing it without a desire for the fruit. The fruits are coming just like for any other person who's doing it for the fruit. They're going to get their result of their action. You're going to get the result, whatever you do. It's only the attitude towards the result that has changed, but you're not freed from the result. Why? You've done the action. You're the doer. The one who does the action has to get the fruit, but the fruit no longer affects the person who's performed it in this way. But the person who has the discrimination to realize that every thought is not me, even the thought to do an action is something that occurs in the mind. It's an object. I want to go to the store. That's a thought. That's called the Sankalpa. You just have a thought to do it. If that Sankalpa is strong, it becomes a desire. Yeah, I really got to get there. I need the milk. Then you do the karma. You get in the car, you go to the store, you buy the milk, and then you get the fruit. You put your milk in your coffee, and now you enjoy. So that simple example there of you've done, now suppose you did that with my morning routine is coffee, so that's my action. But if I have the milk, it's okay. If I don't have the milk, it's okay. Excuse me for this bad example. But I'm just trying to show you that the first step is not the full, because the result of that, if you could just do that, get your mind off the result and orient it towards the Supreme Being, kind of do your duty as with a feeling that I'm doing it as an offering, then that very action, which was a bondage to you, becomes a means to get freed from the bondage of karma in a two-step situation. Because as the mind becomes more purified by not attached to the fruit, the mind is said to be sattvic. That merely, it's these Sanskrit words, it only means introvert, pure, subtle, one-pointed. That one-pointed mind is the one that can discriminate very easily, clearly, deeply, what is the self, what is the not self, what is changing, what is unchanging. And to have this done continuously, this type of practice at some point, because there's a burning desire. This is not like a philosopher in the West who sits on an armchair and speculates in Heidegger being. And This is for someone who wants to know the truth more than anything. He has a burning desire that it's important for them, so that this person whose mind is now fit, they want to examine and see what is the truth of it. Who is the real subject? To examine the fact of the matter. It's not religion. The mind that can examine the fact of the matter. How can I be this ego if the ego is an object to me? Is that the fact of the matter? Or is that a religious? So that's the jignasu. He's examining to see if it's true. But to have the capacity to even do that for a period of time, you have to have vairagya, a dispassion for what everybody else, what the worldly people who have no interest in this subject matter. You have to have that burning desire to be a seeker of truth, ruthless, open-minded, calm, introvert. That's a Vedantin, not dogmatic, questioning everything, not accepting anything. What are the facts? Are those facts my experience? To get to that stage where you can get freed from the bondage of karma totally, you have to discriminate and see that none of it is belonging to me. The idea to do the action and the result are all in the world of duality. They appear and disappear. They come and go. They can't be real. That type of discrimination frees you from the total bondage of karma. That's called naishkarmya. When Krishna said in that chapter, man doesn't attain actionlessness, naishkarmya, merely by stopping actions. How then? By performing actions in a way that purifies the mind in stages, to the point where the mind is so pure that it has the capacity to reject even the idea that I'm an agent. If I'm not an agent, I don't do anything, then I don't get the fruit of any action. The one who does the action gets the fruit. I don't do any action. The Gita says, guna guneshu anavartante. Nature, the gunas, are operating amongst the gunas, the outside world, but I do nothing. That type of discriminative wisdom is called viveka. It frees you from the bondage of karma. That's called the attainment of actionlessness by doing actions in a particular way. So Vedanta, all of this sadhana to purify the mind, to get the knowledge, and after you get the knowledge, nothing more remains to be done. You don't have to practice the knowledge. You don't have to make the knowledge strong. There's no fear that you'll lose the knowledge or that you have to continuously get established. That idea, as opposed to the idea, no karma yoga, no necessity to make the mind fit, but sit in front of a teacher, recognize the presence simply, without all of this mishmash and nonsense, and just recognize that. And then after recognizing it, or realizing it, or knowing it, getting established in it. that idea of liberation after knowledge, getting established in it. How long does it take to get established in it? Well, every person's different. Some people's minds are so messed up, even after knowledge, that'll take quite a bit. You'll have to attend 20 retreats. For some people, they'll wake up and they'll get it right there, and they'll know that they're that, and their life will be different. How will their life be? They'll see the duality just like everybody else, but they'll know that it's not real. They know that they are consciousness. That's their understanding. In the teaching where when you know the self, you'll be the self, it means that when you know the self, you won't know that you know the self. The whole idea of knowers and knowing and things known will be gone. They were all the outcome of ignorance. There's no more knower after knowledge. This is not like the knowledge of something in the world that when you know it, you are the knower. When your ignorance is gone, according to them, you'll know that your ignorance is gone. Why? Because now you know the self and you know the world and duality is false. You know the ignorance is gone. But in Vedanta, when your ignorance is gone, you won't know that it's gone. Just like in deep sleep, when you're in deep sleep, you don't know that you're in deep sleep. If you knew that you were in deep sleep, it wouldn't be deep sleep. In deep sleep, you don't want to know the self. In deep sleep, you can't know the self. In deep sleep, there's no one other than you who could know the self. I'm not going to get into a discussion about deep sleep right now, but I wanted to contrast and criticize that other view. Why be critical? The reason is the people who hold those views, and I'm saying that's 99% of all teachers of non-duality, whether they wear a cloth or they're just householders, they all, if they're teachers of this, I guess I've mentioned their names enough. I won't have to do that now. I'm not criticizing them. I have no right to criticize them. In fact, many of them deserve my respect and admiration. Some of them are great scholars and they lead a life that in many ways is quite admirable. But when it comes to philosophy, we can't spare quarters. It's not about personalities. It's about the idea. Shankaracharya, the greatest of the expounders of this ancient teaching, was criticizing other Advaitins left and right. Why? He says why in his commentary. And so this should be appreciated. Why criticize? He says, it is not out of any enmity to the people. The real purpose is so that the true jignasus, those who want to truly know the truth, we are pointing out the flaws in that teaching, not the flaws in that person. They have a misconception. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily something's not admirable about them, their character, their That's not to say that many of these charlatans are just in it for the money and the praise, but there are many sincere people. They can have a misconception because Shankara was criticizing 9 different schools of Advaita Vedanta that all said there's only Brahman. And Shankara says there's only Brahman, one reality without a second. So why criticize? He said, it's for the sake of the seekers of truth, so they can examine what do they say, what do we say, what is our argument, what is their counter-argument. That's Indian philosophy. It's called Paksha Purapaksha. You give your view. Then the opponent says, no, there's a defect. Here's a better view. Then the Paksha says to the Purvapaksha, and this goes back and forth. Why is this? Because there's a benefit for the jignasu, the one who wants to know, the philosopher, the one who has a love. It's a real love, a desire to know the truth, not just merely to accept what somebody said. I've realized the truth and I'm established in it. You guys have realized the truth. Now you get a step. To question that idea. If it stands the question, then it's acceptable. If somebody points out a defect, the open-mindedness, because Shankara said the purpose is for the seekers of truth. It's not to criticize others. If they're happy with their views, of course, but for the person who hasn't concluded the truth, and so the criticism is only for the benefit of seekers of truth, not to attack some personality. This is a question of ideas. So karma yoga fits with Advaita Vedanta. And let me mention that if you do your actions not with a desire for the fruit, but with a feeling of, I'm offering it, all of my actions are offered to that Supreme Being. He doesn't need, that Supreme Being doesn't need anything offered. It's pure consciousness in your mind that there is a Supreme Being, that's the witness of the universe, that's the pervader of the universe, that's the self of everyone, that to that reality, I'm orienting my mind and my actions to that. Then those actions become a yajna. Yajna in those days meant a sacrifice. But here your actions become a yajna. Your very life activities. So it's not on Sunday when you go to church. It's not when you go to the temple. Karma yoga is a way of life. In India, philosophy and way of life were never separate. Philosophy and how we live, they're inseparable. Even after knowledge, the one who attains this knowledge, that person will also be ethical, will be compassionate, will be self-disciplined, will have all. So they're not to be, oh, that's just religion, karma yoga, and Vedanta is a different thing. I don't want to do religion. I'm going to do the Vedanta part. It's not religion. Turning back to the witness is not religion. It's seeing the fact inside. But to get the mind out of the habit of that extrovert nature, we're born like that. We're hardwired for that. So it's not easy, but we do have the capacity. When you listen to this teaching, believe it or not, your minds are becoming somewhat introvert in spite of yourself. Hopefully, that's the case. So that's the third chapter about how to do these actions. Let me say one more thing about this karma yoga. If you're turning your mind to that supreme being, wanting to know that, wanting to attain that, wanting to be that, if that's the attitude, that's actually what's called bhakti. The mind falling in love with that, cherishing that, seeing that as the highest. That's the true meaning of bhakti. When we love our wife, our house, our children, that's love. That same love, when it's oriented towards that, when the mind is always on that, wanting that, longing for that, like a lover who longs for the beloved, consumed with that, that's bhakti. Karma yoga is bhakti. Doing it with a devotion to that, not with a devotion to the result of my actions. That very karma yoga becomes bhakti yoga. Bhakti is in all of the sadhanas. So, let me quickly come to a few other verses. Towards the end of this third chapter, though Krishna says in 29, those people who are deluded by the gunas. Deluded by the gunas means the constituents of nature. That's the gunas, the qualities of nature. Who are deluded means what? They've identified with them. Those people who are Prakriti Guna Samudaha, who are deluded by the qualities of Prakriti, Sajante, they get attached to the activities of the gunas. Nature's activities, which are carrying on, the Muda, the deluded one who's taken their self to be identical with these gunas, they become sajjite. They're attached, they're bound. They're not really bound. The self is always the self, even when you think I am this. It doesn't, you're the witness of that thought, I am this. Even that ignorance is not in you. It's in the mind. I am this is not in you. Ignorance and knowledge have nothing to do with you. It's all within the realm of ignorance. The witness has no, in the waking, there are people that have ignorance and gurus that have knowledge. But the waking, you're the witness. In you, there's no ignorance, there's no knowledge. That was also within the realm of ignorance. That there's people ignorant, that there's people who have knowledge. That's not the teaching of Vedanta. But for those people who are muda, who have combined their self with the not self, with prakriti, with nature, for those people, that's all of us, they have to act. The people who know the truth, Krishna says here, should not tell the ignorant people, stop doing your duty. They should tell them to do their duty, but do it as karma yoga. That's better than not doing your duty. That's the teaching of the Gita. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, sleep, practice, any action, mental, voice, body, any activity, do it with the mental attitude as my actions are worship to that, and since everything is in that, comes from that, the fruit will come also from that, and whatever it is, I'm not going to be elated if it's good, dejected if it's bad. Why? Because I don't care about the fruit. My mind is turned towards the Supreme. Now let's call the yogi, a karma yogi. By practicing this, I've repeated many times, the fruit, the only fruit, but a very necessary fruit, is that it makes the mind capable of jnana yoga, the next step. So, he says in 30, surrendering all works to me, with a mind wanting to know the self, that's called Atma Cetasa, whose mind is oriented to the self, doing all works as an offering to me, without any idea of desiring the fruit of that, nirashi, nirmamo, not even thinking that that Supreme Being must be the source of all activity, so that the idea that I'm the agent, I'm not even attached to that, nirmamo. Having become that, with that frame of mind, yujisva, and enter the battle of life as a karma yogi, doing all actions as an offering to me, unattached to the fruit. That's the basic idea. You can see, I hope, that if one were to make an effort to try to orient all of their activities in that frame, the mind would become a bit quieter, a bit more introvert, a bit more one-pointed. Because when it's out, it's on a million things. But here it's just on one thing that's called ekagrata. For long periods of time, whenever the mind goes out, to bring it back. That's karma yoga, purifying the mind by turning it in. That's the mind that's qualified for the knowledge of the self, according to the Gita. That's the practical life that people have been asking about. That's the whole emphasis of karma, of the Bhagavad-Gita, even though it teaches you are the witness that has no karma. How to realize that is this subject. So I have marked so many verses in this third chapter that talks about this subject. So there's a question that comes up, Arjuna Uvacha, in 36 of the third chapter. He says, hey, Krishna, impelled by what does man commit unwholesome things? Things that he knows is wrong, but he does it anyway. He knows it's not for his own good. Forget about any scripture. just by his own conscience. He knows this is not the right thing, but he does it anyway. Even though he doesn't desire to do it, he's as though forced to do it, as though it was a force by which he's pushed, even though he doesn't want to do the wrong thing. What is it? So Krishna says, Kama esha, Krodha esha, Rajoguna Samudaha. It's born of desire and it's born of anger. Because of desire and anger always come together in Vedanta. Because the way they see it is, whatever gets in the way of your desire becomes an object of anger. So when there's desire, there's either anger or the potential for anger. If anything gets in the way of the desire. So these two, the desire brings the mind out, and the anger, he says, Rajoguna, it's born of Rajas, the passion in the mind. Desire is Rajas. To overcome that, Karma Yoga makes the mind sattvic. It gets rid of the desire for the fruits of the action, and the desire now is to know the truth. I want to know the truth. I'm doing the actions to know the truth. That's the karma yogi. And therefore, to overcome this rajas, the mind has to become sattvic. That's the whole psychological idea here. How to make the mind a spiritual mind. A mind that has humility and control and compassion and dignity and ethics. That's karma yoga. That mind, a mind that is dispassionate, unattached, the mind that's filled with viveka, discriminative capacity, who can see the facts as they are, that's the result of karma yoga. That's the result of bhakti, being devoted to that, wanting that, thinking about that. But this kama and krodha, we have to get rid of these desires that pull the mind out and the anger that's potential with those desires. So he says in the next verse, just as fire is obscured by smoke, one example, just as fire is obscured by smoke, just as a mirror is obscured by dust, and just as an embryo is covered over in the womb, so is this knowledge covered over by ignorance. He gives 3 examples. It's interesting. For the person whose mind is very pure and very introvert, they're ready for this knowledge. For them, all is needed is the teaching. Just like smoke that covers fire, a little wind, and the fire becomes manifest. For the middle student, he's going to have to rub that mirror and get it clean, that mirror of the mind, and make it sattvic. That'll take more effort. And the third example is that the darkness in that womb is so strong, he's never going to get out of it in this lifetime. Some people are so thick in the samsara and have no desire to see anything else. They're like an embryo in a womb where the darkness is impenetrable. Those are the three examples of different types of adhikaris, of students, and how we have to get more refined out of the darkness, less dust, and finally just the last traces of misconception have to be removed. All the wrong ideas about ourselves, all the things that we've superimposed on ourselves, that last trace of wind, the teacher, out of his compassion, because whatever we do, no matter how much we purify our mind, the mind is still there. A pure mind is still a bondage. So the teacher has to remove the last traces of ignorance. This is what's called the krama, the stages. From the very first stage, do actions, then you become rajas, desire and anger. Do it as karma yoga, that very same action makes you sattva. From sattva, you can do this discriminate knowledge that Muji and Rupert Spira, so that it won't merely be that you'll think, oh, I recognize that, but my life is still going on. The insight will be, I am that, and there's no life going on because there never was a life. There's no life now. There's only the self. That's all that ever was, is, or will be. That's the teaching of Advaita. Nobody ever got established in it. Nobody ever knew it. That was merely for the purpose of teaching, but it wasn't the truth. To get to that stage, in the Bhagavad-Gita, in 13:7 through 11, where Krishna is telling all of the karma yoga sadhanas in order to get this knowledge, he winds up at the end, he says, Vivikta desha sevitum arati jana samsati. Trying to find a secluded place with a distaste for the society of worldly men, men who are filled with desires and anger and ambitions, with a distaste for the society of worldly men, what should you do? Adhyatma jnana nityatvam, constantly engaged in the knowledge of the inner self. Many of you listening now have that quality. You've been constantly thinking about this subject for decades, but the capacity to do it deeper, more insightful, with more fruit, is all dependent on our minds. The clarity of the teaching, that no doubts remain, that all doubts have been clarified, that no obstacle to that knowledge is there. That's the whole purpose of sadhana. So he winds up, after he says, find a secluded place so that the mind could become an introvert. Don't let it get dragged out by worldly people. And then what should you do there? Adhyatma jnana nityatvam, constantly. How many of you're listening to this talk now, obviously, because the subject matter is of some interest to you. But how long is it of interest to you? We have so many other interests. Who can do this inner adhyatma jnana, that knowledge that we now have of the inner self? How many people can constantly keep the mind on that? It's not a meditation where you sit with your back straight. It's this constant discrimination of what is self, what is not self, what is changing, this is the constant inner examination that's called Adhyatma Jnana. That knowledge that the self is unchanging and that the ego, the body, the mind, the senses, the world, the states, they're all coming and going. Nityatvam. What that means is asupta amorta. Asupta. From the moment one gets up till the moment one goes to sleep. And from the moment and until the moment of death, amorta. This Atma Chintana, this thinking about what is the self, who is the self, who am I? Am I the subject or the object? What is the subject or the object? What is ignorance? What is knowledge? How do I get the knowledge? How does that remove the ignorance? What's the result of knowledge? What's the result of knowledge? Does it make me a knower of something, or does it make me Brahman? All of these things are only for a real desires of truth. You say there's ignorance, what is this ignorance? You say there's knowledge, how do I get it? What's the fruit of it? Why should I believe it? That's a jignasu. As the mind gets purer, this capacity to constantly do that, and this is real bhakti. It's only the person who's done this viveka, whose mind is in this condition, and he's rejected everything other than himself. He's not a karma yogi anymore. Karma yoga has served its purpose. It gave the mind the capacity to discriminate sufficiently that it realized the fact that I do nothing. That's the end of karma yoga. That's called Naishkarmya Siddhi, the attainment of actionlessness. For that person, he has no karma yoga. He must constantly revel in the knowledge of the self, constantly contemplating the knowledge of the self, because he wants to realize that. He wants to get the fruit of that knowledge. That ignorant person who now knows he's the witness, but he wants to become the witness that never witnessed anything. That is called Adhyatma Jnana Nityatvam. It's that person who's done the karma yoga. Or if for some reason the mind is pure enough without doing that, then there's no need for it. You can tell for yourself whether your mind is fully extrovert, filled with desires. You don't have to. If it is, then the sadhana, if you don't have those, then you're at a higher stage. You can see everything, everywhere, that Supreme Being. That's another level of sadhana. This takes us to the 6th chapter. I'm going to jump, and I'm going to end tonight with the 6th chapter. For the person who's done the karma yoga as a practical sadhana, why is it practical? Because it refers to every activity in our life, all the time. From the moment you wake up until you go to sleep, you're a karma yogi. Karma yogi means leading an ethical life, a righteous life, a compassionate life, a disciplined life, a life that wants to read about this subject, a life that has found the freedom, the leisure to inquire. Because who has the time for this? In our busy lives, who even has the time for this type of inquiry? So that's the place. But when it served its purpose, and it got to the point where the discrimination, the mind has become so sattvic that you now have the knowledge, I am not a doer, that's the end of karma yoga. And that's the beginning of the 6th chapter. Now you become a jnana yoga, a samkhya. Jnana yogina samkhyanam. For the people who have known the true self, who have discriminated the self from the not self, those discriminating people who are still ignorant, what they have to do is adhyatma jnana. So what is this adhyatma jnana? There's 4 words for it. I'm telling this for the scholars that may be listening. In the Gita, it's called dhyana yoga, the yoga of meditation, a very special type of meditation. In the Upanishads, it's called adhyatma yoga. In the Gita, in the 13th chapter, it's called adhyatma yoga. In Gaudapada text, the Gaudapada Karikas, it's called Mano Nigraha Yoga. These are all synonyms for the same activity. It's for the person who has done the discrimination, who knows the self to be actionless and sees no action in the action. Even though the karma is going on, he knows he does nothing. For that person, he has to get established in that knowledge. He's a jnana, and he has to get nishta. That means devoted to that knowledge, established in that knowledge by this type of yoga that's described in the 6th chapter. I'm just going to do it very briefly, and next and final class, I'll give an introduction to this, and I'll try to sum up what I've said so far in the final class. This yoga, this meditation, is not like meditating on a candle and keeping your mind there, or on a mantra, Om, Om, Om. It's not like doing a japa, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. It's not a mantra. It's not visualizing a particular deity and keeping your mind on. It's not seeing a light. So it's none of those types. Nor is it, there's another type of meditation that's taught in certain scriptures where you get rid of all your thoughts. You go into a samadhi, a trance, that the yogi, his mind becomes chitta vritti nirod. All of the modifications of the mind has ceased. They become merged. There's no more subject. There's no more object. He doesn't know anything. There's no knower, but he's fully conscious in that state. It's called, technically, nirvikalpa samadhi, or asampragnita samadhi. A samadhi with no object and no subject. This is not Vedantic meditation. That business of getting rid of all your thoughts is of no value. If you just get rid of all your thoughts, when you come out of it, you'll see the world again. Will you have thought that just because you stopped all your thoughts, the world doesn't exist? Why would anyone believe that merely by stopping all their thoughts, there's no duality? In fact, the teacher of this type of meditation, his name was Patanjali. He said, when you get rid of all of your thoughts and go into the state of nirvikalpa samadhi, you'll realize yourself different from the world that really exists. Why would you think the world doesn't exist merely because you stop thinking? Nobody thinks because I went to sleep and stopped thinking. When I woke up, the same world was there. When Patanjali went into samadhi, when he came out of it, the world was still there. Why would you think that the world doesn't exist? So this is of no value, any of these meditations, for realizing the truth. But this particular meditation, Adhyatma Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, Mano Nigraha Yoga, is the same, one more word. In the Upanishads, it's called Nididhyasana, which means a deep contemplation. So next class, I'm going to explain what is this Nididhyasana, Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. In the Upanishad says, you should hear the teaching. You should reflect on the teaching, and then you should contemplate. Have your mind contemplating on the meaning of that teaching. That's called Nididhyasana. What is that Nididhyasana? Is it the same as what's being taught in the 6th chapter of the Gita? Yes. Is it the same as Adhyatma Yoga taught in other Upanishads? Yes. Why is it different than meditating on a candle or a mantra? This is what I'll have to try to explain in the last class. To get the capacity to do this type of meditation, the mind must be filled with dispassion, filled with the desire to know. The mind must become pure, free, open, quiet. That mind, if it does this type of meditation, can realize the self in the same way that when he was taught, you are that, but he couldn't realize it. Through this meditation, he gets the capacity to realize the self directly, unlike any other meditation, because it's not really a meditation, it's seeing a fact. At the end of the 6th chapter, Krishna says, yogis practice this meditation, Atma Shuddhaye. It purifies their mind so that they can understand this truth directly. The purpose of this practice, it's something you do, but by doing it, you're able to see a fact. Merely by getting rid of your thoughts, you don't know anything. by meditating on a candle or a mantra, you won't know. But this meditation, you'll see all beings in yourself and yourself in all beings. That's the fruit. Yogis see their self in all beings through this meditation. It purifies their mind and gives them the capacity to see the one self in all beings and all beings in the one self. 6th chapter. Since I'm going to focus on that, you might want to take a look at it for the next class. There was one comment in the comment section, somebody just today said, can you please tell me what is the practical karma yoga? So I hope I address that. It's only by reading the text, each verse, and having it explained that the depths of it, the purpose of it, the clarity of why it's not religion and how it makes perfect sense that this type of practice would make my mind fit for this knowledge. You become, and Krishna explains it in such a sublime way. There are only these two paths. For an ignorant person, he must act. So karma yoga is his only choice. If he does it normally, those karmas will take your mind out, bind you. The only way to freedom is to solve the mistake, and that means to turn inwards and see that there is a mistake, that the subject can never be the object. The whole purpose is a mind that's fit. That's why the satsang movement of going to a class and it's pointed out to you, without the fitness of mind, you leave the class either with the conceit that you're enlightened, or you leave the class with, boy, I wish I could stay established in that. I have the knowledge, but this teaching of the Gita, nothing after knowledge. All sadhana is before knowledge. I'm going to end it with that. So, if anyone has comments, please put them in the comment section. I will answer some of them if I can. Evelyn, I didn't answer your questions at all tonight because that's the advanced PhD program. We're now doing practical Vedanta. So bear with me. I may be able to address that in the next class. I'm going to end this with the traditional Vedantic mantra. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. See you guys next week. Stay safe, stay healthy. Hari Om.